Do you have a handheld game system with non-responsive buttons or a scratched up screen? Well, in this video, we'll show you how to open up an original Game Boy, clean the button pads, clean the circuit board, and replace an old worn scratch screen. Today on the bench, we have a classic Game Boy, or an original Game Boy, or OG Game Boy, however you like to call them. The request was to fix the screen. This one's very scratched up and is already falling off. So we're going to put that one aside. Now, we could clean the LCD panel. It looks like the owner of this has probably been playing it with that screen missing for a while now. But what I would like to do is actually do a disassembly on this. We're going to remove some of this glue and we're going to carefully clean the LCD panel while it's apart. We'll also clean behind the buttons for them. One thing I like to do before we dig too deep, this one actually still has batteries in it, is just test it. Let's make sure we know what we're up against. Looks like our D-pads and our buttons are all working. So we're good. So let's go ahead and do a disassembly. The Nintendo systems, the majority of the Nintendo systems use a combination of a tri-wing screw and a Phillips. The standard Game Boy, the original Game Boy, has 6 tri-wings, 2 in the battery compartment and the 4 on the outside of the body. And then internal, everything else is a Phillips. Please do not mix up which screws are which. I've had several of these come into the shop where a customer has tried to remove the screws using a standard Phillips screwdriver, and of course all the heads are just ripped out. I had a 2DS a few days ago like this. The customer tried to pry into it because he destroyed all the screw heads, and in turn he damaged the main circuit board. This was one of the cases where I had to drill the heads off the screws to open the case. And even after getting into it, when I found that the main board was damaged, I had to tell the customer that it really wasn't worth saving, just because they are going for about $80 on the used market right now. Now, after you get your screws out of it, don't just pull it apart. There's the ribbon cable going from the front to the back half. This cable is pretty robust. You can grab it and just pull it out. There's not any problems there. Now, we can set this part aside because everything we want to deal with is in here. So now we have Phillips screws, and I don't know if you've noticed, but in this shop, I mark all my Phillips with some black tape. This will also expose our buttons, and then we can clean all the pads with a little IPA. There are a lot of screws. And if we got them all, everything will lift out, including the speaker. These are the membranes for our D-pad, our A and B, and our start and select buttons. They just lift out, and the buttons can dump out. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to start with cleaning our pads. We'll use a little bit of IPA and a cotton swab. Just roll it in there and just rub the carbon pad, and it will lift any dust and residual carbon that's floating on the tips. You don't need a lot of pressure. You don't need a lot of alcohol. And that's pretty much that. You can also use a little bit of the alcohol to clean in around the openings, just so our buttons don't stick when we reassemble it. The IPA also works great if you have a lot of, who knows what, you know, old candy bars and soda and whatnot. You wouldn't believe what I've found in these. It works very well to clean around the edges of the case. And while it's open, you know, when you can return it back to a customer and it just looks and feels clean, they always appreciate it. Okay. So here again, we'll just put that aside. Now, dump the screws out of our video board. And we need to point out a few things. And there's something here I don't like already. This has definitely been taken apart before. And here's what I'm seeing. There's normally a foam strip right below the LCD, and that helps keep a little bit of pressure on this ribbon cable. Now this has two ribbon cables. There's one that feeds the bottom and one that feeds the side. The one that feeds the side is underneath. Okay. As long as we don't disassemble this or try to lift the screen, we already know there's no lines, there's no issues. These cables are extremely fragile. If you put a little bit of pressure, they will separate from the glass and it will pretty much render the screen useless. Sometimes you can come in with a little bit of gentle heat, get them to reconnect. But I really have found I can only save about 30 or 40% of the screens with lines. But there's much better options these days. But now that we're looking at our screen here, we're going to get another cotton swab. And we're going to clean the contact points of our buttons. These really weren't too bad. Now, what I'm seeing here, I think somebody had already repaired or had an issue with the lines. So the only thing I want to do on this point is try to clean some of the smudges off the glass. And I don't know if these are smudges or actual chips in the glass, but we'll do what we can before we return it. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so let's address the residual glue on this screen. What I like to use is a hobby knife with a straight blade and push. That way you don't wind up putting a knife through your finger. Also, I wanted to disassemble it because I don't feel comfortable scraping old glue with the screen directly beside it. And as you can see, this glue's hard as a rock. And I don't want to, we're not going to make it spick and span, but I just want to remove the tall edges just so the new screen will sit flat and clean. And we'll also use a little IPA to remove, it looks like, some dirt down in here and maybe some pen marks. The alcohol does wonders for removing ink. A blade like this catches all the high edges and really just makes it a lot nicer when it's done. Get a little bit more down here, and I think we'll be okay. Okay, I don't feel any high spots. So let's get a Q-tip, a little bit more IPA, and we'll clean up around the edge. Yeah, that's nice. While some of the repairs that come into the shop are basic, you know, just simple servicing, some people just don't feel comfortable doing it, and we're always happy to take care of the customer. Okay. We'll have to clean our mat. So, let's go ahead and reassemble. The speaker does have a small tab on it, and the case is also tabbed. So when you put it back together, you're going to have to watch for that. Now, some of the systems, when you start to put them together, they do have different A and B buttons. But the original Game Boy does not. The select and the start button do, however, have an orientation, but there's only one pin, so it really only fits one way. Just make sure the membrane is over each of the pins so it sits flat. Put our screen in, make sure the speaker fell into position, and it did. Then we can put our screws back. I like to start with the screws nearest the pads. That way they stay in place. One other note. Nintendo was always nice enough to show us where screws go. If you can see here, there's paint around that hole. A lot of the systems will have through holes on the board that are case screws. So those ones won't be marked because they will be getting a screw from another location. So they always mark screw holes that are mounting screws for the board. By the way, several of my tools that I use on this channel, the specialty tools such as the tri-wings for the security screws on Nintendo, I find I have bought some more expensive tools, such as this with replaceable tips or replaceable bits. And sometimes the ones that they give you when you buy joysticks or other parts actually are very good. They're not the toughest tool, but they fit the screws very nice. So don't underestimate the free tool set that may come with some parts. Okay, so our board's back in. We've got no screws left. Let's go ahead and reassemble. Now this cable here has a lot of movement. And like I said, it's a pretty tough ribbon cable. So I'll try to do this as best I can for the camera. You can get it in and you can just give it a shove. You can still rip it, you can still damage it, but this one is very robust. Don't forget to make sure, if you remove this board for any reason, make sure your switch is in the right place. Okay, switch back to the tri-wing. Actually, we can just drop these in. All 6 of these screws are the same size, so you don't have to worry about which ones were down in the battery compartment. Some systems will use a shorter screw in the battery compartment. And if something doesn't quite feel right, don't force it, don't cross-thread it. Some of these systems, are 25, 30 years old, and they can't take abuse. Also, on some of the older systems that have become more fragile, I found a lot of N64, the original N64 shells are becoming very brittle. When you put the screw in, if you lightly roll it back, you'll feel it click, and that way you'll chase it back into its old threads, and it may save the system. Okay. Make sure there's no dust on the screen. Can't do much about prior damage. Now these screens that I normally use come from Console 5. They have given me great customer service over the years, so I continue to buy from them. And all you got to do is get a little knife under the edge and peel up the mask. You want to make sure to get the whole thing. Some of them, this one's not like that, but some of them will actually have the centerpiece cut and it stays on the center of the screen. And Trust me, I've put them down with that white on. These ones go on pretty easy. Just align them with the top. Make sure a corner's in. And push them down. That's it. Now, these do also have an outer film, which can be picked up with the tip of a hobby knife. I don't like to pull it off before I give it to the customer, just in case it gets bounced around in handling. So I just peel up the corner so it's easy for them to find and to see that it's not a new screen that's scratched up. And if all went well, we don't have any lines, there's no cartridge. But if all went well, we're all back together and running again. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and thanks for joining us.